They will tell you, yes, they will, that there are thousands of different architectural styles.
Thousands of them?
To which the answer is,
Why don't you jump up a cow?
scratch that. The answer is, that is not entirely accurate. The word architecture comes from the Greek language, which ought to be a clue. Rome took Greek ideas, engineered them on a massive scale, systematized them, and created the first true architectural style, one with rules, proportions, and a repeatable vocabulary that could be taught, copied, and refined across continents. Architecture as we know it was born Greco-Roman, the first architectural style. As they systematized Greek shapes and methods, the Romans added the dome and the arch. In addition to the designing know-how, they also invented, Roman concrete, which facilitated things tremendously. The Greco-Roman style comes back periodically all around the globe. There are variations, offshoots, combinations, but the elements are unmistakable. The pediment, the columns of all three orders, miniature pediments over windows, cornicing. Well, you see all those like in all major cities. Then came the long period of stagnation, and something new appeared on the horizon. Constantine the Great thought about renovating Rome.
He gave up the idea and built a new capital city in a place known up until then as Byzantium, and he named it after himself. Because of Constantinople's location and popularity, the place became very, very wealthy very quickly.
But you see, copying old forms wasn't enough. They wanted something different, something new, something that would reflect their opulence or whatever. And they came up with it rather quickly by historical standards, like the pointed window, the pendative dome, and let's just drown it all in ornament. Byzantium made stone float. Hagia Sophia was the first building where light itself became the structure. It was all Byzantine magic. It may not be as ubiquitous as the Greco-Roman style these days, but for many reasons, it continues to surface here and there, sometimes in very unlikely places. Venice, that little city, was more Greek than Italian for many centuries, and the Byzantine influence in it is striking. The Muslim conquest took Byzantine ideas all the way to Spain, resulting in the so-called Moorish architecture. Islamic architecture itself is largely Byzantine with a few additions. And yes, parts of Russian and Ukrainian architecture, those are distinctly Byzantine, also with a few additions, such as the onion dome. But now you might say, wait a minute, what about Baroque? Isn't that a completely separate, standalone style? Well, if the Renaissance was largely Greco-Roman revival, Baroque emerged not too long after the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, and some of the city's designers and engineers fled to Western Europe. Baroque, when all is said and done, is a combination of Greco-Roman and Byzantine on steroids. Oh, please don't bring up the interrupted pediments. They made those even in ancient Greece. Seriously. Pediments are not load-bearing structures. They're mostly ornamental, and ornaments can be changed on a whim. It's not a big deal. Interrupted pediment. What? To be fair, there was a transitional movement known today as the Romanesque period. It was in large part Greco-Roman without Roman engineering. After the fall of Rome, archives burned, naturally. Continuity of learning was rudely interrupted, and when the dust settled, folks wanted to build stuff like the Romans of yore. But they lacked the know-how, the learning, and the materials.
Well, duh.
Thin walls tilted or fell apart, roofs collapsed, foundations crumbled. They didn't have the math, So they chose the only other alternative they could think of to prop up those walls and roofs. Let's just use more material. More and more. Thick walls don't collapse. Yay! This went on for a few centuries, but then something happened in the city of Paris, no less. Two men, Louis VI, king of the Franks, and Suger, priest, mathematician, philosopher, decided to stick it to Rome. Well, not quite rebel against Rome or the Vatican or detach themselves from it in the style of Martin Luther and Henry VIII, which came later. They proposed merely to show Rome that Paris was also important to Christendom. It was a cultural center with its own traditions. It didn't have to ask Rome what to build and how to build it. So Abbot Suger, that is Suger, not sugar, while Rome continued to be in a high degree of disrepair and Constantinople stagnated and Romanesque architecture was clumsy and not very pleasant to look at, Paris proposed to go higher, literally.
Thus there appeared the pointed arch, the rib vault, and a bit later the flying buttress. Gothic architecture was born. Italians mocked it, naturally. Gothic was a derogatory term.
Yes, that's what those ignorant Goths build.
Goths? Oh, yeah. Another word for barbarians.
Saint Denis is the first fully Gothic building. Everything tended upwards towards God. Those thin columns. Wow. However, how do you build walls that don't feel like walls? How do you keep those walls with large windows sporting stained glass paintings? How do you keep them upright? At some point, engineering faltered. When they were erecting Notre Dame, the walls kept collapsing. The roof kept caving in. The engineer in charge of the project came up with a genius solution. Prop them up from outside. Distribute the weight. The flying buttress appeared and was later on used ubiquitously. They are strikingly beautiful. Oh, and by the way, if anyone ever tells you the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés is Romanesque, try not to laugh. Yes, portions of it are Romanesque, obviously. Equally obvious, however, is the fact that the tower is Gothic. You might as well view that structure as transitional. Architecture runs and lives in cycles. The Baroque era yielded to Neoclassical. Byzantine niceties ornaments were renounced, and the remaining elements were strictly Greco-Roman. Oh, but then came Beaux-Arts, the return of the Byzantine addition to the Greco-Roman model. Gothic Revival swept across Europe and the United States in the 18th and 19th centuries. St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, well, in fact, most American churches built in the so-called colonial style or colonial revival are really a variation of Gothic. Look at this one. And this one. And yes, Trinity Church in New York is obviously Gothic. Less obvious, but still Gothic in spirit, is Christ Church in Philadelphia. No, please don't bother me with castles. Yes, they're Romanesque and they're Gothic, supposedly. They're mysterious and intriguing, but not particularly beautiful. Not what you'd call eye candy. Unless, of course, they're decorative, built not as fortresses meant to protect the owner's ass from impoverished plebeians and a neighbor's military attempts to take over, but as symbols of something or other, especially and specifically as a way of saying, I miss you, Richard, as in the case of Ludwig, King of Bavaria, who commissioned them to commemorate his friendship with the great composer who no longer wanted to have anything to do with him. 3 cities, Rome, Constantinople, now Istanbul, and Paris. 3 cities, three architectural styles. But now let's not forget the most important, or at least the most unexpected part. You may have noticed that the examples we've been looking at are, for the most part, temples and palaces. In Greece and Rome, there were also theaters and bathhouses, but those are exceptions. So, the church and the palace, architectural staples. Query, what about, the population? Those who couldn't afford to live in a palace. Where did they live? Can you afford a palace? Slapdash, ad hoc, provisional houses and buildings have always been around, built with garbage materials and without much engineering involved. In ancient Rome, they were called Insulae. The word insula means island. And yes, they were urban islands. Standalone structures that were sometimes 8 stories tall. They weren't much to look at. They often caught fire and burned to the ground, and nobody minded because new ones would replace them very quickly in a matter of like a couple of months. They weren't architecture. They were shit. Does this remind you of anything? Majestic architecture surrounded by slums. That was always the story throughout human history. But the Industrial Revolution brought with it new methods, new materials. There was a lot of trial and error, but from 1830 to 1940, roughly, beautiful residential blocks, mostly Greco-Roman, also known as Neoclassical, began to appear in historical centers at first and then outward towards the outskirts. Functional sewage systems and paved roads, those helped a lot. Cities became beautiful. Paris, Vienna, London, New York, St. Petersburg, Madrid, Rome, those were suddenly pleasant, desirable, worthy of visiting more than once. And this lasted, well, barely a century. After World War II, we're back to slapdash. Why? I honestly don't know. But all these supposedly utilitarian residential buildings, they're very depressing. They're Insulae. When all is said and done, that's what they are. Temporary, provisional, and spectacularly ugly. I don't know, is it because today's developers have absolutely no taste? Or is it that because commissions and committees in charge of a city's architecture, all they know how to do is take bribes? I don't know. Anyway, I'm not just a writer and storyteller. I'm also an artist specializing in cityscapes. My method is set up in front of what you're going to paint and paint what you see. There's one caveat. What I see, what I'm painting, it shouldn't be boring or depressing.
If I am bored or sad when I'm painting, all it means is that whoever designed this garbage had no taste whatsoever. As you travel the world and see all kinds of cities with all kinds of urban planning, bear in mind, not everything should be classified as architecture. There are 3 styles, 3 canons. In order to create good, eye-pleasing architecture that lifts you up rather than depresses the shit out of you, you must study in great depth those 3 canons and keep them in mind at all times. And now you know the secret of architectural history. Use it wisely.
Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. Visit us on Patreon. Please visit my site as well with books and the paintings. I'm Ricky Vernio, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, and I'll see you soon.